WNBA star Brittney Griner has been released in a one-for-one prisoner swap for international arms dealer Viktor Bout, according to CBS News. Griner was held for months in Russian prisons on some minor drug charges. Here's Brittney Griner's wife, Sherelle Griner, on Brittney's release.
Today, I'm just standing here overwhelmed with emotions, but the most important emotion that I have right now is just sincere gratitude for President Biden and his entire administration.
The move still leaves retired U.S. Marine Paul Whelan imprisoned in Russia. He's been in Russian custody for nearly 4 years after he was convicted on espionage charges that the U.S. has called false. President Biden addressed this as well today. Let's take a look.
We never forgot about Brittney. We've not forgotten about Paul Whelan, who's been unjustly detained in Russia for years. This was not a choice of which American to bring home. We brought home Trevor Reed when we had a chance early this year. Sadly, for totally illegitimate reasons, Russia is treating Paul's case differently than Brittney's. And while we have not yet succeeded in securing Paul's release, we are not giving up.
So to, recap, she was arrested because she had 0.7 grams of cannabis oil in her luggage. She said she packed in a hurry, didn't realize it was in there, has been there for months, was sentenced to years and years in pretty terrible conditions. And a lot of folks were wondering whether or not the war in Ukraine basically put her at a real disadvantage. And there hadn't been a lot of public discussion, frankly, about getting her out. And there was a lot of discourse about whether or not she was being unfairly treated because she was a WNBA star versus an NBA star, whether there was an intentional interest in keeping the publicity down so that the negotiations could happen more easily. I'm not sure what was going on behind the scenes, but it was, I think, a pleasant surprise for a lot of people to discover that she had been released.
Yeah, so there's a lot of elements to this story. I know some people will be upset that we were letting a arms dealer and supplier of terrorists go in order to facilitate this. My view is, it's the U.S. government's job to, if it has any job at all, to rescue Americans who have unfairly and unjustly found themselves in these situations. So, yes, I understand why this trade would be made. I think it is an unmitigated win to be able to bring her home. Good for the Biden administration for securing that. And I'm glad that Biden addressed the Paul Whelan question there, though, because that is a big question. This guy has been held longer. So I'm sure some people will ask, well, did she get bumped to the front of the line in terms of importance of bringing her home because she was a celebrity, or because is there more outrage because, I'm sure some conservatives will say it's because she's an LGBT American or something like that. Now, Biden is claiming that Whelan was just not on the table because, so he was convicted under, they believe that he was a spy. They've said he was carrying a lot of cash. I think he was there for a wedding was the reason he was there. He was carrying a lot of cash. They've said he's a spy. The U.S. has denied that he's a spy. I think it's difficult to say who's right or who's wrong. He could be a spy. We would not admit if he was, probably, or they could absolutely have just seized the opportunity to apprehend a totally innocent American. That release should also be secured, and the Biden administration should have. This was a big person to let go. I guess that's always the frustration. Yeah. Like when we got back, Bo Bergdahl, right? We let didn't we? I think we let a number of terrorists go in that case. So we get one person and we give them the scum of the earth walks free. So that's frustrating. But, it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm also curious. I will be talking later in my radar about Joe Biden's choice to move, or the Democratic Party's choice to move South Carolina up in the voting schedule and in the primary voting schedule, and how that contrasts with some the deliverables that he hasn't provided to Black Americans in order to get their vote. And I do wonder, the Brittney Griner case has been brought up in the conversation about what has he done for Black America. A cynical view might be, okay, this is a priority that's a lot easier to get for Joe Biden to demonstrate some interest in delivering for Black Americans in something substantive and economic, like canceling student debt or 2000.
Well, and that plays into what I just said. Like, that's why if they had the choice of one or the other, right, he gets to put Black Americans at ease.
I free Brittney Griner. Don't ask questions about whether or not I'm going to destroy Social Security.
Real bad. And then, of course, we just have to bring this up, the hypocrisy of condemning Russia for imprisoning Brittney Griner for possessing a cannabis product when we have locked up so many people for nonviolent, consensual drug use or drug selling or whatever. So many Americans, probably the majority of Americans in a lot of cases, think this should be totally legal. I do as well. And many of our elected officials do, and Biden's progress on this front has been slow. Recently, there was the changing the schedule was announced for, I think, for federal, but that's not going to affect states. It's the administration, all local, state, local, national government in the U.S. has moved on all of this so slowly, and it's morally appalling. It is unjustifiable. Nobody supports it anymore. So we can't stand on our high horse and condemn Russia, which deserves condemnation for all this and more, but we're not really leading here.
It's difficult. Look, apparently 45% of all inmates are in there for drug offenses. For women, it's 59% are serving sentences for drug-related offenses. I mean, that's predominantly the reason that women in particular are in jail. You have no movement on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. You know, to look back at 2020 and see how that seemed to be, you know, the protests seemed to be the movement of the era, and to see that there was absolutely no political movement on after Joe Biden got elected. He promised to do it by the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. That was a promise that he came up with. Nobody asked him for that. He set that own internal deadline and then blew past it. And the thing I'll never forget is I remember the night before, looking online, thinking, is anyone going to care about this? And I saw, you know, I think Al Sharpton put out a tweet, like a preemptive tweet. Hey, I'd rather have a good deal than a deal that comes on time. And now here we are almost, you know, 2 full years after that with still nothing on the table. After there was an increasing, I think, bipartisan consensus around a lot of these criminal justice issues. You know, we talked about that horrific police execution case, the Daniel Shaver case a couple of days ago. There's a lot of interest across the aisle about qualified immunity being a problem, especially after we've seen the cops fail in Uvalde and all of these other instances across the country, unable to track down the people who perpetrated any number of crimes. We've been talking about this college murder case as well. You know, there's a lot of, the police are not sitting high on the hog the way that they have in recent years, and yet there's absolutely no movement from it because there's no public pressure. And I do think that moments like this, I want to celebrate this as a victory. Obviously, it's such a huge victory for Brittney Griner's family. I can't imagine what her wife has been going through, but it would be, I think, negligent not to also scrutinize whether or not there's certain political advantages to this for a president who has woefully underserved the criminal justice advocacy community more broadly and Black Americans more narrowly. I
think there are a lot of police officers actually who also share the view that busting people for low-level drug offenses is a waste of their time.
I was just talking to one, actually, a family friend in Cleveland who was driving me to the airport, was a former police officer, and we were having this exact conversation about drug use and about, not Brittney Griner, but about drug use and what cops are forced to do and the roles they're forced to take on and how their time could be better spent. And I think you're absolutely right. The battle lines that used to be around this issue just aren't where they used to be. And there's a lot of room for progress if the Biden administration wants to take a bite at it.
Well, this just in, Paul Whelan's family has called Griner's release the right move. So they're celebrating that, which I understand absolutely, although I would really hope to see some progress on that case as well. So hopefully the Biden administration is still working on that behind the scenes.